Alright, it's time for another update and forecast on all the various wildfires going on in California. In this video, we're going to be focusing on the Caldor Fire, the Dixie Fire, and the Monument Fire, mostly going over some of the big updates and the progression of these fires over the last few days. But then we're also going to, as always, take a good look at the fire weather forecast to see how these fires might progress over the next few days. And just a quick tease, and you might actually be able to tell this from looking at the satellite imagery, things are trending in the right direction. The whole beginning of this week was absolutely crazy with that red flag warning. And the good news is that things look like they are going to be better over the next couple of days. So we'll hopefully all be able to enjoy our Labor Day weekend if there's not too much of this smoke settling down over Northern California. Now, before I really dive into it though, I do just want to post this in the live chat and pin it so that people can see that I am planning on this being a more concise update than usual, just because I only have about an hour here. So I most likely won't be able to look at the live chat throughout the course of this video. But if you're watching this after it's live, one thing I'll say is I will add the chapters to the comments below or to the video itself, and you'll be able to click directly to the fire that you're most interested in. So without further ado, you can see what the satellite imagery looks like right now. Looks a lot better than in previous days. You notice a lot of that smoke over the fire and over Northern California at the very start of this run. And I would actually say that's some good news, because whenever we see the smoke settling over us like that, it means that the winds have calmed down. When we have those very strong winds, that's when the smoke plumes are going directly into Nevada and Idaho. So while it's bad for air quality to see that smoke settling down, it's actually a good indication that the fires themselves are calming down. And if we zoom in there, especially on the Caldor Fire there, you can see not all that much smoke coming off of it right now, especially when compared with previous days. Looks like the most active one is maybe Dixie or the River Complex up there. Now, one thing before we dive into the Caldor Fire, I did just want to show this because I found this just before I went live, and I thought this would be a good way to start out the video to show why I'm prioritizing these three fires in this video. You can see Dixie, Caldor, and Monument are now all in the top 20 largest wildfires in the history of California. Dixie being number 2 at around 870,000 acres. Caldor is up to 15 with 213,000 acres. And Monument has now made it onto the list at 19 with 177,000 acres burned. So that's why we're focusing on these ones. But other reasons we're focusing on these as well, there are still a number of areas and communities that are still currently threatened by actually all three of these fires. So while the forecast looks like we're trending in the right direction, there certainly are still some concerns out there, and we'll go over all those concerns throughout the course of this video. So just first, I'll show this map. I always like to show this map because it shows if there's a red flag warning over our fires, and first thing you notice is that there no longer is, so that's some great news there. And the other reason I sometimes like to look at this map is because when there's a lot of fire growth, you'll see a lot of dots outside of the previous fire perimeter. So it's a quick way to see how much growth there's been over the last 24 hours. And what you notice is that you might not really even see what I'm talking about because there's so few of those little hotspot dots outside of the previous perimeter. We might see a couple of those dots outside where there's still some growth there, but overall, Caldor Fire has certainly slowed down over the last couple of days with those dying winds that I was already talking about. So this is another one that I haven't been showing as much recently because the hotspots aren't exactly accurate and we have a better way to look at that. But I do like to show this because it's a quick way to illustrate why this fire is a concern and where our main concerns are. If we put on the structures there, you can see the structures show up as those orange dots, and you can immediately see our top 3 areas of concern on the Caldor Fire. It's really where you have a combination of that red color, where it shows where the most active parts of the fire have been recently, and a combination of where you see those orange dots, which is where the most structures are. So one area that we're going to be diving into is the Kirkwood area. because that's just south of where a lot of those hotspots are. We're also going to look at Wright's Lake up here. That's actually been the most active part of the Caldor Fire over the last couple of days, and we do have some structures in that area. And then, as always, we're going to take a very close look at South Lake Tahoe, Christmas Valley, Myers, Echo Lake, this whole area to see where the fire perimeter is in regards to those structures and communities. You can see on this, not many hotspots showing up on that entire western edge of the Caldor Fire at this point. So just clicking in here, one thing that I always like to do, and since part of this is kind of a wrap up of what we looked at throughout this entire week, that is August 28th. And then this is when we go to the current fire perimeter, or the most recent fire perimeter data that I was able to get my hands on. You can see how much this fire grew with that red flag warning that we had this week. And something you'll also notice is the direction of that growth, and it's the reason that red flag warning was so important. We had that for two main reasons: the low relative humidity, which in some cases was all the way down into the single digits, but then also those southwesterly gusts that were blowing at about 25 to 35 miles per hour, and as you can see, pushed this fire up towards the northeast. So we'll just leave that most current fire perimeter map on, and then we'll actually zero in here and take a look at our most important areas. So there's the Kirkwood spot, and actually it would be kind of interesting to see how each individual priority has changed over this red flag period. So back to just August 28th, you can see that the Caldor Fire itself was still to the west of Highway 88 there, and then I believe it was around September 1st, or let's go to around August 30th, it jumped over Highway 88 there. It was continuing to be fueled by those southwesterly winds. Then by September 1st, it had continued to spot and move towards the north of Kirkwood. This is something that we looked at in one of our videos this week. We actually clicked on a weather station on this ridgeline here, and it showed a 52 mile per hour wind gust. So where the fire actually was, most likely was about some 25 to 35 mile per hour winds, and what that was doing is picking up little burning embers, dropping them down into some of these critically dry fuels, and allowing that fire to continue to move towards the northeast. So we'll just adjust our view here and take a look at what the most current map is showing. So that's what it looked like as of September 1st. As of right now, which is September 3rd, you can see, we have to actually zoom out more because there has been a fair bit of growth in this area. I'll also get a more aerial view. So September 1st and current. So you can see a lot of that growth has continued to be towards the northeast. But the big thing that I notice is that it has stayed out of Kirkwood as of right now, which is just amazing to see, because this was certainly an area that was a major concern. As that fire was coming over this ridge line, we saw it start to, all the little spot fires showing up here. So great to see that it hasn't moved into the Kirkwood bowl that you see right there. If we zoom in on Kirkwood Lake, that does show that the fire perimeter has come down to where we have some of those structures on Kirkwood Lake. But as always, we have to take all of this kind of fire perimeter data with a grain of salt, because again, I think some of these planes that collect this data are flying at something like 30,000 feet. So you imagine it's not going to be down to the meter resolution. There is going to be some air there. And whenever there are structures, usually they do a pretty good job of getting some good structural protection in. But you can see that continuing to have a large amount of growth towards the northeast. Looks like it's wrapping around Caples Lake right there. But the good news in that area is for right now, it is still out of Kirkwood. Now, we can also zoom on over to the Wright's Lake area. And I definitely want to see the progression on this, because this is an area that has been burning the most recently. This is actually the most active part of the Caldor Fire over the last couple of days. That's what it looked like August 31st. September 1st was a big day as we started to push up into that area. And the most recent map shows that actually looks like it's calmed down over the last couple of days. You notice there wasn't all that much of a change between September 1st and September 3rd right there. But that has been one of the more active parts of this fire. And you notice all that green right there? That means there's a lot of fuel in this area. Whereas up here, it looks like we start getting into some granite, so it should actually start slowing down as it moves into this rockier terrain. But as you can see, there is still a large amount of fuel in this area, so we will have to keep our eye on it moving forward. One thing is, it's really going to depend on the winds about where this fire continues to grow. So we will take a good look at the fire weather forecast in a second just to predict where that growth might be. But the overall point I want to drive home with those winds is they are much, much less than Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday when we had that red flag warning. So regardless, we're going to most likely have less growth over the next couple of days than we had during that red flag warning. It already seems like the fire itself has calmed down. If we go back to that satellite imagery, in the past at about, 3 p.m. right now? In the past, by 3 p.m., we had giant smoke plumes coming off of the Caldor, Dixie, and Monument fire. So certainly looks like things have calmed down, and the big reason for that are those calming winds. So do want to look into this area, and we will look at the progression here because this was, I think, the most critical area throughout this entire red flag event. We'll go to August 29th, August 30th. I think this was one of the most critical update and forecast videos that I've ever made. I think we followed this for about 4 hours that night as we were watching it just push down closer towards Echo Lake. And then on August 30th, so this is showing the perimeter data that we had by August 31st in the morning, but it actually shows the growth that happened on August 30th. And this was the really critical day. I would say one of the scariest days that we've had on the California wildfires throughout this entire season. Remember, this was, not sure why that happened. This was where at the start of the day, it was still up by Echo Lake, and then we started getting these spot fires closer and closer towards Christmas Valley, and then at one point, dropped some spot fires down here, and what you'll notice is that what I was hoping was that the fire was going to slow down. I think I have to turn off some of these other perimeters here. I think it's confusing it a little bit. Maybe it's just a little too zoomed in there. Huh. Not exactly sure why that's happening. Might help to turn some of these off. Huh. Not exactly sure what's going on right there, so I'll just keep it more elevated right here. We won't be able to look exactly at the topography, but I could tell the same story. So that the fire was coming down by Echo Lake, and then it started to spot on this left side of Christmas Valley here, and then it started actually burning back up the hill. We were even looking at some videos of people driving along Highway 50, flames on the west side of the road, some spot fires popping up on the right side of the road, and then towards the end of that night, there was reports coming out that the spots had actually moved to the eastern side of Christmas Valley as well. So that night, I think, was one of the scariest nights of the wildfire season so far because we have thousands of structures in this area, and it was fully on both sides of the valley. But amazingly, that night throughout the last couple of days, they have somehow been able to keep this fire out of the communities itself. So if we zoom in here, you can actually see where the fire perimeter comes down. Again, there are going to be some cases here where you see the fire perimeter cross some of these roads, but again, take this with a grain of salt. And I haven't actually seen any reports of the fire itself moving into any of these communities. So I believe that they've been able to stop this fire basically in its tracks. And you notice it's right alongside where you see those roads without it actually coming over those roads in most of these cases. Again, that's not a coincidence. That's because of the amazing work that's been done by all of our firefighters throughout this entire season. I think one of the craziest places to see that. And again, this is now looking at the most recent fire perimeter map, is in this Myers area. This was an area I was very worried about because we had those southwesterly winds that were trying to just push that fire directly into Myers. But you can see how they were able to just stop that fire directly in its tracks. And how they worded it was basically herding the fire. So they pretty much herded it around South Lake Tahoe, and then it continued to burn up towards the northeast. So to be able to see that progression, I think it would be helpful just to look at where the most growth has been recently. So that we'll go back to August 30th. That's what it looked like August 31st. September 1st, we had a big day up here. That's where we had those strong southwesterly winds leading to a lot of growth on this northeastern section, where it's also burning uphill right there. So you have two factors working against you. You have the winds pushing it up there, and then fires also like to burn uphill because they're able to preheat some of the fuels. So we had a lot of growth as we got into September 1st. And then what you'll notice, I'm just going to click to the most recent map. September 3rd, not a big difference there. Just in case you missed it, does look like we had some growth on this southern edge right here. Not exactly sure if that was the fire itself or if that's perhaps maybe a firing operation that they did. But overall, not nearly as much growth over the last few days as we were seeing at the start of the week when we were in the very peak of that red flag warning. So overall, I would say South Lake Tahoe is looking fairly good right now, but again, we will have to just keep our eye on it. The one other spot that I don't want to forget to zoom in here is this Echo Lake. I know a number of people have been worried about this, and this is kind of ties into what I was saying earlier, where fires don't like to move downhill, they like to move uphill because they're able to preheat the fuels, and that's what it basically looked like on September 1st. As we go to September 3rd, very little continued growth into this area. So that's been amazing to see there. And you can imagine how difficult it is to stop that fire just based on how steep that terrain looks. So amazing work done by all the resources in that Echo Lake area. Just zooming out again so you can see it. Amazing work done. Overall, I think that's the theme of the week. This was I was saying, I think the most critical situation that I've personally forecasted for against. Again, I'm still young, I'm still pretty new to this, but I did forecast almost every single day throughout the 2020 wildfire season, and this was one of, if not the most critical situation that I'd ever seen, just based on how the fire was on both sides of Christmas Valley, and then even more importantly, that the weather was not giving us any break whatsoever. Continued red flag conditions for I think 3 or 4 days. So I was very worried about the Caldor Fire throughout this week, but overall amazing work done by all of the wildland firefighters out there. So just to summarize, the Caldor Fire, it is up to 213,000 acres. That again does put it at number 15 largest wildfires in the recorded history of California. We're at 29% containment right now, and if we want to visualize all of that, this is a good way to visualize the acres burned. This map shows the progression. That green color shows where the fire was on the 15th and 16th. That blue color into the purple color shows where the recent growth has been. So right in that red color right there, it looks like that's still August, maybe 25th. And then you can see how much growth we had to the northeast over the last week. And again, that just perfectly illustrates why the winds are so important. It's those southwesterly winds that were pushing that fire farther up towards the northeast. Now, if we want to look at the containment on it, we have picked up some containment, as we just saw on the Cal Fire. It says we're up to 29%. Almost the entire left half of the fire has been moved into that contained category, which you see with the black line right there. Now, I didn't call it the west side of the fire because they have done a certain split through this fire where they now are calling it a west zone and an east zone, but it does look like we have lots of containment on the more western side of the California, or the Caldor Fire. And then again, the key areas that we've looked at throughout this video are the key areas that are still uncontained: the Kirkwood area, Wrights Lake area, South Lake Tahoe area. Still going to see some activity there over the next couple of days just because we still have very hot, dry conditions. But the good news is that we no longer have that extreme wind to go along with that heat. And you'll also notice they did make some updates to the CAL FIRE website. One of those updates is now you can actually access the evacuation map straight from Cal Fire. Again, it doesn't look like they are including that Nevada evacuation orders there, so you might have to check other resources for that kind of information. But it's basically the other map that I have in the link in the description. I actually still kind of like looking at it from the link itself versus the website, just because it makes it all full screen, and I haven't had enough time to really play around with this embedded version of the map yet. But still, I'm mostly saying good news throughout this video because it has been calming down over the last couple of days. But the key thing to keep in mind is that all of South Lake Tahoe is still under that evacuation order. I imagine they still have those evacuation orders in Nevada, even though you can't see it on this map, because we have had a fair bit of growth in that area relatively over the last couple of days. So always make sure to stay updated with the local resources. And again, I put all the links that you need in the description of this video, from the hotspot maps to the evacuation maps, really anything you could find. And if you can't find it, the best places to go is Cal Fire and InsuWeb. Then right here you can see there has been some updates here for the damages and losses on the Caldor Fire. You can see we're up to 857 structures destroyed. And again, they have the damage assessment map embedded here, but I'm sure there's a way to make this full screen, but I just kind of like the full screen version. That, again, I have the link for this in the description. And you notice we've seen a lot more information be populated on this northeastern section of the screen recently, and unfortunately there is some of the bad news coming in, but we have been expecting this bad news to come in for quite some time. Just looking at the fire progression map, it was that day that looks like it's the bright blue color right there, so maybe the 30th, when we had just a massive amount of growth on the northeastern section of that fire. And because of that, you can see we did lose a very large amount of structures. So again, thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected by this wildfire. And again, this link is in the descriptions if I'm sure you're interested in trying to find out how your structure has fared throughout this fire. So you can zoom in, and one thing you can do on this map is you can actually click on the structure itself, usually. So you can click on the structure itself, and then usually it has a photo there as well where you can see exactly what the structure looks like. And you can tell how extreme the fire behavior was as it moved through this area. It looks like almost every tree in the area looks like it's dead at this point, and most of the photos that you look at, the structure basically just completely gone. So again, thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected by this, and that link is in the description if you want to access that information. Now this, I think, is where some of the good news comes in, though, is right around Christmas Valley. That paints the picture of what we were thinking about earlier, where we couldn't exactly see where that fire perimeter was in relation to those houses, but looks like they've done some damage assessment reports on that western side of Christmas Valley, and that black color there means there's no damage. The red color means that it's greater than 50% damage, and in most cases usually destroyed. But around Christmas Valley, it looks like I don't know if we lost one house. You might have better eyesight than me, but I'm not seeing one house in Christmas Valley that is showing up as that bright red, which means completely destroyed. Also actually looks like we did fairly well in Echo Lake as well. That was an area that we were concerned about, because one of the videos that we watched, it was actually a car driving right on Highway 50 right here, and they panned up to the left side of the road, and we could actually see these structures on fire. So what I was worried about was that was the case for all of these structures. But overall, really surprising news, I would say, coming out of that area, given the extreme fire behavior that we had as it moved through. Again, that ties back to what I was saying a number of days ago, that once wildfire season wraps up and everyone's not so busy, I'm definitely going to try to interview some of the fire personnel to actually find out what this fire was like on the ground, because it's incredible what they were able to do throughout this fire. Now, when it comes to those resources, you can see we do still have a large amount, and they have some new little animations here. We have over 500 engines and over 4,000 personnel still on the Caldor Fire. So that's pretty amazing to see right there, and I'm very happy to say that their job should be getting easier over the next couple of days. If we want to see that, we can look at the weather forecast, where it was that low pressure system that's all the way up there in Canada now that caused all this trouble towards the start of this week. When it dipped through Washington and Oregon, it brought some... Actually, we can look at an old forecast model and look at this. So let's look at Mondays, because that was when the red flag warning, I believe, started, and then we really started to get those extreme winds that led to all that fire growth over Monday, Tuesday, and even into Wednesday as well. So clicking in here, it was that low pressure system that dropped down into Washington and Oregon, and that brought those gusty winds to Northern California, but it has now finally moved up into Canada. So that, I would say, is some fantastic news there. As it moves up there, it's bringing those extreme winds with it. That's why we're having calmer behavior on our fires over the last couple of days. And then in the meantime, it looks like we're just going to develop a big high pressure system over California, which will most likely mean that it'll be getting hotter and drier throughout your Labor Day weekend, but that typically means it's going to be less windy as well. So let's actually look at those winds on the Caldor Fire, and I think the area that I'm still the most worried about is South Lake Tahoe and perhaps that Myers spot right there. So we'll use that as our point for our forecast right here. Again, it looks like we're pretty good in that area, but as we've seen on the Dixie Fire and a number of other fires this year, it's never out until those rains start to come in November. As we saw on the Dixie Fire, then the fire can flare back up. So I think good news, but actually Cal Fire put it perfectly. Cautiously optimistic. I think that's the best way to put it. But right there, you can see why our satellite imagery is not showing all that much activity on our wildfires right now. It's because we have much calmer winds, just 22 mile per hour wind gusts, which means the sustained winds are probably 3 miles per hour right now. So unbelievable change in the winds. During Monday, Tuesday, and that red flag warning, we had some 40 mile per hour winds. So pretty great to see that the winds have started to calm down. As we get into Saturday, looks like they're still relatively calm. Sunday, calm again. So looks like we will get a couple of days where we can catch our breath a little bit, although we will have to continue to keep an eye on it. I did mention that things are most likely going to be getting warmer. Looks like we're up to 75 on Saturday, and Sunday warming up as well. So yeah, that warming trend is coming in, which most likely means we are still going to have some very dry air. So don't get me wrong, there are still some concerns in the fire weather forecast, but I always think that winds are the number one thing that leads to rapid growth, especially when you get those spot fires like we saw in Christmas Valley. So it's good to see that the conditions appear to be calming down. So that basically sums it up. Warming temperatures for Labor Day weekend, depending on where you are. And with that, we're also going to have some calming winds as well. But while those calming winds are good news, again, the big thing is to stay updated with those evacuation warnings and orders, because they can change by the minute. And again, this isn't the map showing everything. The best place to find all of these resources are by going to your local resources for that kind of evacuation information. I really just show this map to give you a snapshot of what it looks like. So just the overall summary for the Caldor Fire. Red flag warning certainly led to a very large amount of growth, most of that growth being towards the northeast, as we had those strong southwesterly winds. And we had some scary situations in Kirkwood, Wrights Lake, South Lake Tahoe, that as of right now, we appear to have dodged a bullet. Or not really dodged a bullet, because that implies luck. And it really wasn't luck. It was because of the unbelievable work done by our wildland firefighters that those communities were able to be saved. But with all that being said, we've seen how this wildfire season goes. So we're certainly going to be keeping an eye on those areas as we move forward over the next couple of weeks. And yeah, I think that pretty much sums up the Caldor Fire. Unbelievable start to the week, but it looks like things are getting better, and it looks like those better conditions will be sticking with us for the next couple of days, so we might actually be able to hold our breath. Now, one caveat I will say there is that if we look at the incident report, it does still show 32,000 structures threatened. So I don't want to give anybody a false sense of security just based on my own optimism, but there certainly are still some challenges that we have to keep an eye on. And if we want to look at the Wharf S-Fire simulation, the full description for this is in the description of this video. I realized I was just saying the same thing in every time I showed this, so figured it'd be better just to type it up and put it in the description of the video. But this is basically simulating where the fire is going to be growing over the next 2 days. And the biggest thing I notice is that we're not seeing nearly as much growth as this model was predicting in the past. And you also notice it's not just southwesterly winds anymore. Those winds are much more erratic, changing by the day, changing depending on where the topography is. So it's going to be less continued growth just in one direction. And overall it seems like less growth than in previous days, but the model does still have some activity, and some activity in those same places that we've been following and continue to be our main concerns. If we just go through the whole 2-day forecast, it looks like it's still expecting, actually the largest amount of growth is forecasted to be in the Wrights Lake area. That's why that is one of our big priorities right now. And that is also one of Cal Fire's big priorities. So they do have a number of resources out there, but still predicting some growth around Kirkwood and the area just southeast of South Lake Tahoe. So certainly we'll be keeping an eye on those spots as we move forward. Now, next fire that I want to talk about is the Dixie Fire. This is a fire that actually had some really big updates throughout this week. I turned away from it for a number of days because the big story was following exactly what was going on in the Caldor Fire. But as we turned away, it flared up, and there was 2 days in a row that grew about 30,000 acres. And there is a spot on the Dixie Fire that is creating some cause for concern. So it will be important to really dive in there. But first, just looking at the satellite imagery, you notice not nearly as much smoke coming off of the Dixie Fire right now as in previous days. So looks like conditions have started to calm down. But with that being said, when we look at this map, again, we have the better fire perimeter map that we'll look at in a second, but I do just like to show this because where you see the red, that shows where not sure what's going on with our fire perimeter there. It's freaking out on us. But I really just wanted to show this map for the hotspots and the structures anyway. So again, we're going to look at a better map when it comes to exactly where the fire is, but it just paints a picture of where the most activity has been recently on that northern section and the southeastern section right there. I think the big concern is this southeastern section, which has been making a run up towards Highway 395, where you can see there are a large amount of structures. So with that in mind, let's zoom on over to Google Earth. And it actually would be interesting to watch the fire progression over the last couple of days, because this was one of the big surprises of the week. I certainly wasn't expecting this to happen, where we got 2 days in a row of over 30,000 acres burned. Just going to close up the Caldor Fire. We're going to go down to Dixie. We'll turn off September 3rd. Go back to my oldest one, which is August 30th. You notice how there's some hot spots down there, which is southeast of Taylorsville in that area. Let's see if I can zoom in one more time and still be able to see the whole map. Yeah. So still had some hot spots down there. We had been watching that for a couple of weeks now. But then on August 31st, you notice it really started to, or by August 31st, it really started to flare up there. And then September 3rd continued to grow. And then the most recent fire perimeter map has it continuing to grow up towards Highway 395. So we'll just look at the most recent fire perimeter. And again, still seeing some growth up here, but I'm just not going to spend as much time up there because not as many structures in that area. But I think the key area to look at on the Dixie Fire is this arm that has been growing up towards the northeast. Now, we do have a number of communities down here like Greenhorn, Kronberg, Lake Davis, so I'd imagine all those places are still in mandatory evacuation orders, but most of the growth has been up towards this northeastern section. Similar story to the Caldor Fire, where those southwesterly winds just pushed that fire towards the northeast. So this was the big thing we were following yesterday, as the very northeastern section of this fire started pushing down what they're calling this an escarpment. I think I'm saying that right. And the reason that's a concern is if we change our view here, you can see that there is a number of structures just northeast of there. Not sure what's, map's not exactly cooperating there. Looks like Patton Village, Herlong, maybe not pronouncing that right. And then we also did notice a number of structures close or around Highway 395. But the thing that I will say in this area is it sounds like it started to slow down at least a little bit in this area. You notice that very steep hill that it has to push down. Fires don't like going downhill. And they did say that, I was listening to the update. It sounded like, again, don't quote me on this because I'm not positive I'm saying this correctly, but it sounded like they had the width of 10 dozer lines just all the way down on below this hill that we see right here. So hopefully nice containment line right there. I think maybe the concern moving forward with that still being an active part of the fire is the possibility of maybe spot fires jumping over those containment lines, which is something that we've seen be a big problem on all of our fires throughout the season. But I think that will continue to be, I think, the main spot that we follow on the Dixie Fire is that edge that's pushing towards Highway 395. But as of the most recent data, you can see that the fire perimeter has not reached Highway 395 yet, and I wasn't seeing any reports of any structures being destroyed in that area as of right now. So we will keep an eye on that as we move forward. Just looking at this map, this is also sometimes useful to be able to see where the most recent hotspots are. So if we look at the GOES detections, again, it still shows that that is an area of the fire where we are picking up some heat, but it looks like less heat than in previous days. So I think the thing to wrap up that we'll continue to follow that area closely, but as of right now, it looks like it is still on the western edge of Highway 395. Now, when it comes to the Dixie Fire, for the numbers, you can see we are up to 870,000 acres, still number 2 on the largest wildfires in the history of California. If we look at the fire progression map, you can see that most of that growth has been on the southeastern section of the fire over the last couple of days, where you see that red color, that's where the recent growth has been. That blue color is where the fire had burned previously. Now, if we look at the containment on the fire, you can see that's, I think, where some of the good news comes out on the Dixie Fires. Very large amount of containment almost around that entire southern and western edge of the fire. But our two areas that remain active are that northern edge and that southeastern edge as well. One good thing that I didn't mention earlier, but is something interesting to point out, not seeing very much activity on this spot fire that grew to about 30,000 acres south of Janesville anymore. But now you can think about how that's actually going to create almost a barrier and a protection for Janesville from this arm that's now extending up towards Highway 395. So that's some good news that we now have an area where the fuels are cleared out right there. But we are going to have to continue to look at Milford and Doyle, because Milford, Doyle, Greenhorn, and Kronberg, I think, are the areas that I'm watching the closest on the Dixie Fire moving forward. Now, when it comes to that containment, again, you can see it's basically the entire southern and western edge, but I think the best thing that I noticed recently is that we're now completely contained on the upper part of Lake Almanor, around Westwood, almost completely around Westwood, and in that area just south of Janesville as well. So some of the top, and actually Taylorsville, I hadn't noticed that one yet, where we've transitioned to that black line where it's now contained. That red line is where it's uncontained. Some of the key spots that we were worried about in the past are certainly looking much better. Now, with that being said, we have had a very large number of spots on the Dixie Fire that we've had to talk about for, I think, maybe 40 days now. I can't remember exactly when this started. This should have a legend on it. If we zoom in there, I think I've been following this fire since, what is that, July 14th? So, yeah, lots of updates that we have been going over, but looks like we're trending in the right direction in a lot of our key spots, but we do still have some top areas to keep an eye on. Again, with this damage assessment map, you can actually click into some of these areas, click on the structure itself where you see the black structures, that's where there's no damage. The red structure is where there's greater than 50% damage, and you can actually see a photo as well. Again, the link for that is in the description, and thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected by not only the Dixie Fire, but all the wildfires in California. Now, if we look at the evacuation warnings and orders, again, I can't possibly go over all of those. I'll just show a quick snapshot of what the map looks like. Again, don't get evacuation warning and order information from me. I try to put the links for that in the description below, but if anything else, go to Cal Fire or NCWeb and you can find all the most recent information when it comes to evacuations and anything like that. Now, when it comes to that damage report, I'm interested to see if this went up because it did look like that map had populated a lot more structures than before. And it does look like we are up to 1,282 structures destroyed. I hadn't planned on showing this, but I am actually curious to see where that ranks the Dixie Fire historically. So welcome to Cal Fire, stats and events. We're going to go to most destructive California wildfires. Looks like Dixie is number 14, and I actually this is the first time I've noticed that Caldor has now moved up to number 20. That's just showing 857 though. When we're looking at the Caldor map, yeah, it's just showing 857 right now. So 2 fires currently burning that are in the top 20 most destructive. We have 3 fires currently burning that are in the top 20 largest. So overall on the Dixie Fire, we had a large increase in activity over this last week, especially on that southeastern section. Because of that, we do have some new evacuation orders to worry about. And we are going to have to continue to keep a close eye on this. Again, I turned away from it for a couple of days there, but looks like we are going to have to continue to watch it as we move forward, as that may be a fire that we watch basically until the rains come. I hate to say that, but given the season, how critically dry the fuels are right now, it kind of looks like that's going to be the case with a lot of these fires. We're going to be following them for quite some time. So again, you can subscribe to this channel if you have enjoyed this video so far and you want to continue to see wildfire coverage just like this. So clicking in here, you can see why the Dixie Fire looks much calmer just based on the satellite imagery that we're seeing here. Why it looks so much calmer is those winds have significantly calmed down. In the past, we had some 40-mile-per-hour winds coming through here. It looks like we're now just down into the 20s. On Saturday, looks like we're actually going to have even weaker winds, and Sunday, weak winds once again. So wind-wise, we're looking good, and as always, I think that's the number one thing that leads to fire growth. So I'm expecting calm behavior over the next couple of days, but we will still have some warm conditions trending up into the 80s on Saturday. Sunday trending up into the mid-80s, which means that you're still going to have some very warm and some very dry air. So we will continue to see some activity over the Dixie Fire, but with those winds calming down, I think the potential for those very extreme days is lessened. It's really those days that we see those 30 to 40 mile per hour winds that I really start to get worried. So good to see that the wind forecast and overall fire weather forecast looks fairly good for the Dixie Fire. Now I do just quickly want to go over the Monument Fire as well. We did have some big updates there, but this should be a relatively quick one because there hasn't been all that much activity over the last couple of days. Just clicking into the Monument Fire, sometimes it's easier to find it if we just go to the fire perimeter first. You can see where those hotspots have been, the key areas we've been watching on the north right there and the west. Again, we're going to look at a better fire perimeter in a second, so take this one with a grain of salt, but I do just like to show it because where the red is shows where it's been the most active recently, and where those orange dots are where the structures are. So it paints the picture of why this is a concern. We have Hayfork right there, which I believe got some new evacuation orders earlier this week when it started to flare up again. So just coming back to Google Earth, we are very disoriented at this point. Zooming up to the Monument Fire, I want to look at the progression here to see when that flare up happened. So we'll close that up, we'll open up Monument Fire. That was August 31st right there. You can see where that yellow color is, shows where some of the heat is on the fire. Where that red is the fire perimeter. And then by September 1st, you notice we had a big flare up on this western edge right there. And then the most recent data, still seeing some activity on that western side. So this continues to be a spot that we're following closely. The main reason for that is you can see Hayfork right in here. We have a large amount of structures, and the fire perimeter has, it almost reminds me of the Caldor Fire a little bit, where the perimeter comes right up, in some of these cases, right up to where a lot of those structures begin. As of right now, it looks like majority of the area has been spared, but we will continue to follow that very closely as we move forward. So just looking at the Caldor Fire, or the Monument Fire, the fire itself is up to 177,000 acres. If we look at the progression, where that red color is where a lot of the recent growth has been, and you can see a lot of that recent growth on that area just to the northwest of Hayfork. So that's why we did get some new evacuation orders in that area, and that's why it continues to be an area that we're going to follow. Now when it comes to the containment, you can see we're up to 33%, and looking at the map, if it decides to show it, looks like a lot of that containment is actually just north of Hayfork. I hadn't noticed that, but that is very encouraging to see. You can see where the fire flared up. That's certainly still a big concern. Where you see some of those black X's is where they have some of those containment lines put in place, but it looks like we have a lot of work that's been done directly north of Hayfork. So that's actually more encouraging than I thought when I was looking at where a lot of that heat and activity has been over the last week. So that's very interesting to see there. Again, similar story for the Monument Fires forecast. Calmer winds over the next couple of days, which should allow calmer behavior than the last couple of days as well. If we just want to quickly go down, I wonder if they have the structures. So 50 structures destroyed on the Monument Fire as of right now, which really shows the amazing work that they've been doing, how the fire perimeter came right up to this area, and on the entire fire we still only have 50 structures destroyed as of right now. Now, I just got reminded of something. I forgot to show these two links when we were going over the Dixie Fire, so I will just go over the two things that I wanted to point out on these two links. For the Dixie Fire, where is the structures threat? Right there, structures threatened. That's always one of the big things I look at to see how we're faring. We still do have 13,000 structures threatened on the Dixie Fire, so always take what I say with a grain of salt when I say, oh, we're looking good in this area, we're looking good in this area, because as I said, we've seen this a number of times where the fire can flare back up, and then we're right back where we started. So certainly a lot of things that we have to continue to watch on the Dixie Fire. Now, I also have the Wharf S-Fire model for the Dixie Fire to simulate where it's going to grow over the next couple of days. Again, the description for what this model is in the description of this video, but just want to see where it's predicting growth, and it looks like it's predicting the majority of the growth on that north, or now it's the southeastern section right there where we've seen the most growth recently into Highway 395. And again, we run this out of the San Jose State Fire Weather Research Laboratory, and it looks like we actually have to change our domain here because the fire is actually moved out of our furthest in domain. So we're going to have to change that to be able to see how it's simulated in the Highway 395 area. The big thing that I will say though is in the past, the model was predicting just a massive amount of growth right here. Actually did a pretty great job of predicting where that growth would be, and it's predicting much less growth over the next couple of days with those calmer winds. So we've seen that this model has done fairly well. It's done amazingly on the Caldor Fire on a number of those forecasts. It literally just perfectly matched up. So it's good to see that this model shows that the Dixie Fire will be calming down, and I would actually say that that is very likely looking at what the conditions look like right now over much of Northern California. In the past, we had those huge smoke plumes coming off of our fires. Looks like they've settled down right now. Certainly looks like we've been trending in the right direction for the last 48 hours. And the big reason for that, again, the winds have calmed down. It was the winds that caused all of that extreme growth Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday with that red flag warning. And as the winds calm down, the fire behavior should calm down as well, so that we can all actually enjoy our Labor Day weekends. Now, one thing that I do always think about when the winds are calming down is that does allow more of the smoke to settle down to the surface. And because it is Labor Day weekend, you might be going outside and enjoying the outdoors for the long weekend. So we will take a look at the smoke forecast, because again, usually all this smoke is just blown into Nevada, but when a high pressure system develops over us, like we are going to be seeing over the next couple of days, that brings weaker winds, and instead of that smoke being pushed into Nevada, it settles down into California, which is actually what you can see on the current air quality. All of most of Northern California in that unhealthy air directly under the river complex. Looks like we're into that very unhealthy category. Still unhealthy air in the Tahoe area. And then again, as we have those calm winds, we should likely see poor air quality throughout much of Northern California throughout this weekend. If we actually want to see the forecast for how that smoke is going to move, we can press. Seems like this always happens. I think this automatically updates. So we'll just try to click this one, see if this one will work. I think it automatically updates. Yeah, it's not working for us. So I'll try to put the link for this in the description, and then you can see it. So overall, the quick summary: Dixie Fire, Caldor Fire, Monument Fire had a very large amount of growth over this last week. We covered it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday throughout that red flag warning. We had some scary situations on the Caldor Fire as it moved closer towards Kirkwood and through Christmas Valley and South Lake Tahoe. As of right now, looks like we are looking great in those areas, but we do still have some concerns moving forward. On the Dixie Fire, the big story was we had a huge flare-up on the southeastern section, grew about 30,000 acres 2 days in a row, and it is still pushing closer towards Highway 395, so we'll keep a close eye on that one. And then on the Monument Fire, we had a big flare-up to the northwest of Hayfork that led to some new evacuation orders. But as of right now, it looks like all of northern Hayfork is in that fully contained area. So looking better there than I had actually originally thought, but we're going to have to keep a close eye on that. And when it comes to all of these fires, I do believe there are still a large number of evacuation orders and warnings in place. So always be sure to stay updated with your local resources for that kind of information. So I'm happy to say that this week is over and this red flag event is over, because it certainly was quite a week for wildfire in California. And I hate to say it, but we have quite a bit of the wildfire season still to go. So if you've enjoyed this video and you want to stay updated on all the wildfires throughout California, you can subscribe to Holt Hanley Weather. One thing I will say though is that I won't be updating tomorrow or Sunday, taking a couple days off to get a nice breath of fresh air. And given the calmer conditions, I think it's okay to do that. And then hopefully I'll be nice and refreshed for when some more challenging conditions move back in, which unfortunately it is wildfire season, so eventually they will. But when they do, I'll be here every step of the way to follow all of these wildfires with all of you as we move through this 2021 season. We will get through it eventually. Overall, I think the theme of this entire week, I'm going to finish up by just showing what I think is one of the most amazing wildfire maps that I've ever seen. It's zooming into South Lake Tahoe, rotating around Christmas Valley and the South Lake Tahoe and Myers area, and seeing how that fire perimeter was stopped in its tracks before it moved into those communities. Unbelievable work done by our wildland firefighters. So huge thank you to all the wildland firefighters out there who are doing what I imagine is got to be one of the hardest jobs in the world, and they do it extremely well. So big thank you there. As always, thoughts and prayers go out to everyone who has been affected by these wildfires, and I hope this video was helpful, and thanks for watching.